The Kiseki series, which is translated as the Trail series in English, heavily builds on shared plot lines and complex political intrigue across many games. So welcome to part 1 of the redo to my Sky SC story summary series. There's definitely a lot to cover after those tense final scenes between Estelle and Joshua in Sky FC, so let's dive right in. Trails in the Sky second chapter begins right as Estelle awakens in Gransel Castle. It seems like a pleasant morning at first, though the events of the night before quickly come flooding back. She rushes to the garden terrace, back to where Joshua left her, only to find her father there instead. He finally tells her about the Society of Ouroboros and the circumstances as to how he met Joshua all those years ago. Back then, Joshua swore that if the Society ever contacted him again, he would disappear from the Brights' lives forever. With all this said, Estelle's father apologizes to her and tells her to forget about Joshua. But of course this is nothing but infuriating to Estelle. She screams she hates him before dashing off from the palace. Now, Estelle's convinced herself that Joshua must have returned to Roland, so she hops on to the next flight back to her hometown. Aboard this passenger aircraft, Estelle meets a man who claims that he is a priest and who introduces himself as Kevin, before attempting to flirt with her, though he brings that to a quick end when she breaks down in tears. Then once she's calmed down, Kevin explains a bit about his role in the Septian Church. He claims that he's a wandering priest who was sent to teach Sunday school to the rural areas of Liberal. Then, after Estelle shares very briefly about her current situation, Kevin decides to accompany her to Roland, just to make sure she gets back home safely and all. When they finally arrive back at the Bright home, Estelle cheerily checks every room in the house for Joshua, before finally collapsing to her knees when he's nowhere to be found. But Kevin helps her realize that there is still hope in finding Joshua. Then, lo and behold, her dad and Shara enter the room. You see, it so happens that Father Kevin notified the guild branch as to Estelle's location once they arrived in Roland. Cassius then apologizes to his daughter for what he said earlier, and says he's counting on her to bring his son back home. Fast forwarding about a month, and we're now at the Bracer Training Lodge in Le Mans State, home to the international headquarters of the Bracer Guild. Estelle and ATLUS finish up their morning sparring match before heading inside for breakfast. And that's when Kurt arrives and gets them started on another training session in some old sewers for the day. Then, in the middle of the night, Estelle is awakened by loud noises just as ATLUS barges into her room, shouting that the lodge has come under attack. The two make it downstairs right as a severely wounded Kurt enters via the front doors. He believes the Society may be responsible for this Jaeger attack. And speaking of these dangerous mercenaries, a sword-wielding Jaeger breaks in through the window and challenges the girls. And though we fortunately manage to keep up with him, another Jaeger shows up with a smoke bomb that contains sleeping gas. When we finally come to again, we find ourselves in the nearby forest. Estelle and ATLUS make it back to the guild lodge eventually, only to find that the orbital phone has been completely destroyed. So in other words, no reinforcements will be coming. We learn from the engineer that the Jaegers kidnapped Kurt and are hiding in the nearby Grimsel fortress, so that's where we head next. When we finally reach the top floor, we encounter a spear-wielding Jaeger who seems very familiar despite us having never fought him before. And so, it actually turns out this entire Jaeger situation was a ruse put on by Kurt, Karna, and Grant as ATLUS and Estelle's final test in Le Mans. The girls have passed with flying colors, and so have successfully completed their bracer training here. Meanwhile, in an unknown location in Liberal, a figure who goes by the name Campanella has just returned from Erebonia. Apparently, he and his forces were partly responsible for keeping Cassius busy during the coup attempt last game. Now that he's back, together with Louvet and Wiseman, the three vaguely discuss some of the society's future plans. Next, we see the Capua Sky Bandits in what appears to be a completely decimated town. It turns out it's the remains of an Erebonian village called Hommel. Sound familiar? Well, it's the same place Lieutenant Lawrence mentioned last game. But going back to the Capuas, it looks like Joshua is the one responsible for freeing them from jail, and now they're all working together. Then down in the ruins under Gransel Castle, Captain Schwartz leads Father Kevin right to the chamber where the group took down the massive archaism in FC's finale. It appears that Kevin's real mission in Liberl is curiously related to the search for the Aureole. Then, on behalf of the guild, Elnan formally requests Estelle, ATLUS, Shira, and Agate to recover any information they can about the society. At this point in Sky SC, the player can choose to partner with either Shira or Agate. I personally chose the redhead on my first playthrough, so Estelle and Agate part ways with the other two, who head off to Roland themselves. Then the prologue comes to a close as Estelle and Agate depart for Rouen. Jean informs us that a number of people have reported ghost sightings around the city boundaries. He lists 3 main witnesses that we do well to interview, the first being the son of hotel manager Norman. Since this Belden fellow is a member of the Ravens, we reunite with Race, Dean, and Rocco in their old warehouse to learn of his whereabouts. Turns out he's been hiding out in his family home ever since getting spooked by this ghost sighting. A soldier from Erletten is next on the list, and just as Estelle and Agate are about to leave, they encounter a young girl and her parents who appear to be foreign traders currently visiting Liberl. They seem like a really sweet family, and we chat with them for a while before heading off to Mercia Orphanage. It's good to see the completely reconstructed orphanage building for the first time since we've last been in the region. Then the matron tells us to meet up with the kids in Minoria Village, since they're currently in Sunday school. Here, Estelle is reunited with none other than the wandering priest, Father Kevin Graham. Then after getting Polly's testimony, we head back to Rouen with Kevin in tow. Back in Rouen, tensions are about to boil over between the 2 mayoral candidates' campaigns. So just as it seems like us bracers are gonna have to get involved, good ol' Ollie shows up on a boat, playing his lute. His antics manage to placate the 2 groups somehow, and both campaigns head their separate ways. Back at the guild, Niall and Dorothy, our friends from the Liberal News, are here to cover the stories happening in Rouen. Dorothy has also managed to capture a ghostly picture on camera, so combined with the witness testimonies we gathered, we figure that it's heading in the direction of Genis Royal Academy. Here, Estelle gets to reunite with Chloe, then the 2 girls team up to ask the student body if anyone's seen the ghost. After finally finding 2 students who have, the girls return to the student council room to report the findings. It's at this moment that Estelle spots the ghost herself from right outside the window, and being the ghost scaredy cat she is, of course she promptly faints from shock. But once she comes to, she, Agate, Olivier, and Chloe, along with Dorothy, head to the old schoolhouse where the ghost was seen drifting towards. We must solve a series of riddles to finally uncover a statue that moves and reveals a hidden passageway. Dorothy is told to stay at the entrance for safety's sake, while we proceed through the labyrinth. We eventually reach a room where one of the society's enforcers lies in wait, and in a truly spine-chilling first encounter, our heroes are introduced to Enforcer 10, the Phantom Thief LeBlanc, or aka the guy from that Rouen riddle side quest from last game. He then summons a humongous mechanized archaism out of nowhere, and though we do manage to bring it down, LeBlanc completely paralyzes us with his crazy abilities right after. He reveals that the gospel in his possession can create holograms of the user, which explains all the apparitions that have been spotted in the region as of late. Olivier gets into a ridiculously funny argument with LeBlanc about the nature of beauty, which thankfully buys us enough time for Dorothy to show up and save us all with her flash photography somehow. So LeBlanc bids us adieu, then completely vanishes, leaving us with nothing to do but report back to the guild in the morning. Our next plan of action is to head to Zeiss to investigate any potential movements of the society there. That night, LeBlanc and Louvet discuss the success of the first experiment. These gospels are just the tip of the iceberg, according to Wiseman, though suddenly, the two enforcers take notice of a presence hiding behind some crates. They make to attack their supposed eavesdropper, but it's then revealed to be just some drunk Raven members staggering back to their hideout. In actuality, though, this all turns out to be a lucky break for a certain priest, since it was Kevin who was doing the real eavesdropping. He mutters to himself about the Ouroboros enforcers, something that's quite suspicious considering how the society's existence is not widely known information. Anyway, Chapter 2 begins with Estelle and company boarding an airship to Zeiss. And right as they touch down, an earthquake strikes the tech city. Oddly enough, none of the other areas within the region report feeling earthquake tremors though, so it's our job to investigate this strange phenomenon. A similar occurrence happened the other day when an earthquake was reported to have struck only the Sankheim Gate, so we head off to question the soldiers there. Private Henning recounts a mysterious man in sunglasses walking up the road right around the same time as the earthquake. Just then, the CWO of the Wolf Fort rushes over and reports that an earthquake just hit their own station. A maid in the kitchen saw this man in sunglasses the day before and began following right behind him, though when she turned one of the corners, he was suddenly nowhere to be seen. This was quite the ludicrous thing to her, considering they were on the fort's upper level. Returning to the guild, we find that in the meantime, Professor Russell has been developing earthquake detection technology that reads the flow of the septium veins located beneath the ground. Tita comes along to help us install these detectors in 3 specific areas of the region. One of these is located in the Chaldea Tunnel, and on the way out, the group comes across Shara and ATLUS, both who've been continuing their own investigations into the society. ATLUS has a long moment ogling over Tita and her cuteness, #cuteness is justice. Then both groups part ways. Final location for device setup is Leiston Fortress, where we get the opportunity to briefly reunite with Cassius. Tita mentions that her grandfather has found an unexpected hint about the Gospels, and if Olivier is in the party, Cassius thanks him for taking time away from his own mission to help out. Back at Zeiss Central Factory, Professor Russell monitors the info that can be gleaned from the devices, and right in that moment, the readings spike, culminating in an earthquake that strikes Leiston Fortress. Fortunately, Big Brain Cassius was anticipating a quake, so no major damage occurs at Liberal's military headquarters. But from the changes in the data, Professor Russell figures that something is controlling the flow of the septium veins, allowing it to precisely target specific areas with earthquakes. He pieces together that the source of the disturbance is coming from Elmo Village. Mrs. Mao gives us the key to the back gate, which is used to access the caves behind the village. Then, once we've finally reached the very depths of the caves, the person waiting to greet us is none other than the man in the sunglasses. He introduces himself as Walter the Direwolf, Enforcer 8 of Ouroboros. He has planted some sort of object in the ground, a device that channels the Gospel's energy, and that has been the cause of the boiling water temperatures in Elmo and the earthquakes throughout the region. He summons some ancient underground beasts called abyss worms with this device, and it's up to us to take them all out. Though after observing our battle, Walter expresses his disappointment at how weak we are. He strikes the party with only a single blow, which still brings us all to our knees. He ponders hunting down the runaway Joshua instead, since he alone would put up a better fight than all of us combined. This clearly strikes a nerve with Estelle, who can barely get to her feet, and actually would have lost her life then and there if not for Sieg, Chloe, and Zin of all people arriving in the nick of time. It turns out that Zin and Kilika have a past with Walter. Plus, we come to the conclusion that the Gospels have the ability to enhance the capabilities of any orbital device. This prompts Professor Russell, Chief Murdoch, and the rest of the ZCF crew to make researching the Gospel their #1 priority, now that they've completed the Arcee's new engine. As for us, apparently we've been formally requested by the military stationed in Gransel, so we prepare to head to the capital city next, with Tita and Zin in tow. Chapter 3 begins with the installation of the Arcee's new engine by the ZCF maintenance crew. In the meantime, the newly promoted Lieutenant Colonel Sid begins his transition from command of Leiston Fortress to the Gransel region. As for the Bracers and friends, during the flight, Zin shares about his past with Walter and Kilika. Walter and Zin were both students of Kilika's father, the head of the dojo that taught the Taito fist style of combat. Walter was expected to become her father's successor, but that's when his arrogance began catching up with him. You see, Walter reveled in the aggressive side of the Taito style of combat, and eventually adopted what's called the Murderer's Fist. Once it was clear that Walter was preparing to leave the dojo and continue heading down this path, Kilika's father challenged him to a fight to the death. Zin was an observer of this match and witnessed the very moment Walter cut down their master. Walter disappeared after that, and Zin has been searching for him ever since. Though not out of a sense of vengeance, there's just something that Zin wants to confirm. Once in Gransel, we're told that a formal representative from the military will be by later to discuss the request with us in person. You know, to avoid any prying ears via orbital phone communication. Now, curiously, Elnan receives a call from the Irby Royal Villa, requesting aid in finding a lost child's parents. So we head to the estate, only to find that Butler Raymond has already lost track of the girl. The child turns out to be the same girl we met back at Erleton a couple chapters ago. Somehow she knew Estelle was the bracer who'd come, so she wanted to find a good hiding spot and have a fun game with her. She says that her parents had some important work to do, and that they would be back to get her at the manor after they were done. But us bracers take Ren into our custody while we continue the search for her parents. Lieutenant Colonel Sid is already waiting for us back at the guild, so Ren and Tita head upstairs while we get down to business. The military in Gransel is currently responsible for the safety of all foreign dignitaries who are currently visiting to sign the non-aggression treaty proposed by Queen Alicia. This document will bind all participating nations to an agreement of prioritizing peaceful negotiations before ever resorting to force. Sid asks us to investigate a host of threatening letters that were sent to all the dignitaries and involved parties in this treaty signing. This includes a ton of others, such as the hotel, airship company, liberal news, and even the church, which will be playing a role in helping the ceremony run smoothly. Agate takes most of the civilian agencies, while Estelle, Olivier, Zin, and Chloe all head to the embassies, Gransel Palace, and the Liberal News to ask about the letters. This mission actually serves as a good opportunity to question all the international branches about Ren's parents, given that they are foreigners visiting Liberal. Elnan manages to get a hold of their names, Harold and Sophia Hayworth. Then Ren and Tita head off to explore the palace city together while everyone else deals with work. Estelle and company meet with Ambassador Cochrane at the Calvardian embassy and learn that in exchange for signing the treaty, Queen Alicia has promised all nations involved a sample of the Arcee's new engine. As for a possible suspect for the threatening letters, Ambassador Cochrane believes the Warhawks in the Erebonian government are the ones responsible. On the other hand, Ambassador Cranaw at the Erebonian embassy believes the opposition parties in Calvard are the ones to blame. Now at Grancel Palace, the Queen asks Chloe of her opinion on the suspect. This allows the young heiress a chance to demonstrate the deduction skills and political understandings required of a good future ruler. And to her great relief, Queen Alicia agrees with her granddaughter's reasoning. Surprisingly, Olivier poses a serious question to Queen Alicia, asking her about the timing of this non-aggression pact. Now, of course she's noticed how tense the situation has become in Crossbell State, a city-state located right between Erebonia and Calvard. And in actuality, this proposal is her attempt to quell some of these tensions, despite the rather inopportune timing for Liberal, since they are still recovering from the coup attempt. Now, oddly enough, Agate reports that he wasn't able to find the names Ren gave of her parents in any of the airship company records. Then that night, Ren asks Estelle why she looked so sad when they first entered the room. Since this was the one that she and Joshua stayed in during Sky FC, us players understand why she's saddened by the memory. What bothers her the most, though, is that she currently can't do anything to help him, wherever he happens to be at the moment. Meanwhile, Shara and ATLUS have found the remnants of the intelligence division in the Capua's old hideout. They've uncovered a cryptic message about a person having successfully prepared the chairs and tables for a tea party, whatever that's supposed to mean. ATLUS and Shara are then ambushed by some intelligence division soldiers, though after they defeat these men, Campanella, Enforcer Zero of Ouroboros, introduces himself to them. He causes these men to horrifically explode, then takes his leave, though thankfully it turns out these bodies were actually just archaisms. Then, oddly enough, Father Kevin makes himself known from behind the tents. The scene switches to the Capuas and Joshua taking on a group of those same archaisms. It turns out they were the ones that left the info for Shara and ATLUS to find, since they've decided to bear the brunt of these machines so that the guild may focus their efforts on solving the strange tea party riddle. In the morning, Elnan relays the information that Shara and ATLUS discovered to us. As this is all being discussed, Ren quietly slips out the door. Though once Estelle realizes she's disappeared, we start visiting all the places Tita and the girl in question explored yesterday. We even encounter Maintenance Chief Murdoch and the new engines that'll be given to the other nations along the way. Then at the airship landing port, we encounter Olivier, who has just seen Mueller off to Bose on some important business. We also find Ren here at last after she quietly approaches from behind us. Then back at the guild, Ren waits for everyone else to head inside before slipping a letter from Joshua into Estelle's hands. It says to meet him at the Garoon Gate at sunset, and when Agate sees what's going on, he tells Estelle she'd better get going. So the young bright takes off for the stated meeting spot, but unfortunately for her, she happens upon a Father Kevin here instead, not Joshua. It actually turns out that Kevin received a letter telling him to meet someone in this very same spot as well. Then suddenly the two are ambushed by strange flying archaisms. Kevin points out that they looked like the ones down in Grancel Palace. A slip-up that definitely sets off alarm bells for Estelle, since he shouldn't know anything about the things below the castle. She wastes no time in confronting him, though the wandering priest can't say much in response. only that the letters are probably forged handwriting. He then promises to explain himself once they get back to the guild. Along the way, they happen upon a flustered butler Philip who's frantically looking for Duke Doonan. He joins us and, to all our shock, we find that everyone's been knocked out by some sort of sleeping agent back at the guild. A letter has been left at the scene, stating that Ren and the Duke have been taken hostage. Shara and ATLUS arrive just in time to help us piece together the clues as to what this tea party actually entails. Since the phones have been broken, we have ATLUS head to the Herb Royal Villa to relay all this info to Sid just in case. Then it's up to Estelle, Shara, and Kevin to figure out where this tea party will be. That's when Sieg arrives to guide us to the harbor area of the city. We begin searching the warehouses and end up having to save some other hostages, all whom tell us that the remnants of the intelligence division have stolen the new engines. We finally find the right warehouse, but unfortunately it's too late. The engines have already been installed into a new high-tech tank, driven by former Captain Amalthea. She plans to use this firepower to force the Queen to release the currently imprisoned Richard. But before Amalthea can leave the port district, she's stopped by a division of the Royal Guard and its captain, Julia Schwartz. But the tank contains a gospel inside, which shuts down all their cannons and armaments. Not all is lost, though. Kevin pulls out an artifact, the one that used to belong to the former mayor of Rouen, Mayor Dalmore. This gives Kevin the ability to neutralize the gospel. Then it's just the tank left. Now, after we defeat the machine and Amalthea, the Duke finally comes out of hiding. Yet there's still no sign of Ren. And that's because she just so happens to be the one who orchestrated this entire tea party in the first place. Ren formally introduces herself as Enforcer 15 of Ouroboros. Her parents are actually just manufactured Orbital puppets, just like those from earlier who were disguised as the intelligence division. The young girl calls down a giant archaism called Pater Mater, which means father and mother in Latin. It takes the gospel from the tank, all the while stunning everyone with its capabilities. The rest of the party catches up just in time to catch Ren's farewell before she and Pater Mater take off into the night sky. Fast forwarding to morning, Cassius brings in Richard to try and convince Amalthea to talk. Meanwhile at the guild, everyone's still reeling from the shock of how a small child like Ren could possibly be an enforcer for the society. But soon enough, Estelle cheers everyone up by promising to drag Ren out of there herself. Kevin also finally introduces himself as more than just a wandering priest, but as a member of the Gralsritter, aka the Grail Knights of the Septian Church. They're the ones responsible for investigating and collecting all artifacts that are found throughout Zemuria, which explains why Kevin was in possession of that staff last night. Overall, Kevin has been sent by the church to investigate the society and the Aureole. So now that we all know his true intentions, we agree to work together the next time we meet. Then Kevin heads off on his own. Back at the Ouroboros hideout, Louve congratulates Ren on a job well done. Meanwhile, the small girl shares that she really liked hanging out with Estelle. That's when Wiseman and Campanella show up, the former stating that he actually plans to ask Estelle to join the society. Speaking of said young bracer, Niall and Dorothy catch her right before she boards a flight to Roland. Dorothy hands her the photo she nabbed of Joshua on the Bobcat before it took off last night, and, unsurprisingly, Estelle is quite shaken at this news. Alright, so Chapter 4 begins with what happened in Bose whilst everything was going down in Gransel last chapter. In the now repurposed Liberalian military base, Major Mueller clues us into the Capua's background. You see, these siblings were once a noble family from Erebonia, before they were stripped of their title and status. Mueller has been tasked with recovering the Bobcat for the original creditor that authorized the Capua's loan for this very ship. Now, in the meantime, the Sky Bandits and Joshua have begun their infiltration of the base. And when they finally make it to the runway where the Bobcat is kept, Dawn and Kyle waste no time preparing it for takeoff. Meanwhile, Josette reassures Joshua that they're not just gonna leave him here, right as Major Mueller steps onto the scene. He remembers Joshua from Sky FC, and though he honestly doesn't care about the ship, he can't let them leave without a fight. But before they can land their powered-up attacks on each other, the preparations for the Bobcat are completed, prompting Joshua, Josette, and her brothers to make their escape. Dorothy shows up just in time to snap a photo of the ship before it completely clears the base. And speaking of Estelle and that photo, she's currently pondering over many feelings, namely worry and frustration over Joshua. Shara approaches and reminds her that all her friends would like to help however they can, since they can all tell something big happened during that talk with Niall and Dorothy. So as Estelle makes her usual rounds aboard the airship, everyone in the party attempts to support and/or cheer her up in their own ways. From Chloe having the correct hunch as to what's going on with Joshua, to Zin wanting to train with Estelle once they reach Roland. She does love martial arts after all. Though on the lowest deck of the airship, Estelle overhears Olivier speaking to someone. He's actually talking to Mueller via his artifact. Estelle finally confronts this wandering bard over the many suspicious things surrounding him. She's also noticed that deep down, he distances himself from others, and actually admits that she considers him an important part of the team, and ultimately someone she does trust. Olivier is visibly touched by Estelle's kind words, then heads back to a seat before the airship begins its descent. And as it does so, everyone's attention is drawn to the mysterious and thick fog enveloping Roland. Now, Estelle's disappointment at having to stick around in Roland for the time being, instead of heading straight to Bose, isn't lost on the senior bracers in our party. So Shara has to remind her that a bracer must always prioritize the missions that have to do with public safety. In this case, it makes more sense to help out in Roland, especially so if this fog turns out to be the Society's doing. Besides, the Sky Bandits are already long gone, so it'd make little sense to begin investigating that over Roland's current mystery. But before we get started, the group takes a break at the Brights' home. Here, Shara recalls her time participating in a traveling circus troupe that used to visit Roland once a year. One day, Shara had to escort the young Estelle home, and that's when she met Cassius and Lena Bright for the first time. Ever since then, Shara became close with Estelle's family and would spend time with them whenever she was in town. But with the reminiscing done, we head back to the guild, though on the way there, we hear the faint chiming of a bell. This sound seems particularly surprising to Shara, oddly enough. It's puzzling how mundane this fog seems to be in comparison to the 3 experiments already conducted by the Society, though Mayor Klaus's urgent news quickly turns the tables on that. You see, his household's maid, as well as a number of other townspeople, have all fainted and are completely unable to be woken up. Father Divine at the cathedral finds the cases particularly odd, seeing how none of the church remedies are working. We learn that of the 4 victims' family members, some recall having heard a bell chiming around the same time their loved one fell asleep. It's become late by the time we're done with the investigations, and the 3 men in the group have noticed that Estelle and Shara's familiarity with all the Roland townspeople has really taken a toll. The guys tell them to go back to Estelle's home and get some rest, while they remain on the lookout for any suspicious persons. So that evening, while all the girls are sleeping, Estelle is awoken by the sound of a door closing. She finds Shara downstairs reading her tarot cards and decides to join her for a while. one of the drawings actually prompting Estelle to finally be honest about the picture Dorothy took. Estelle asks if she should hand the photo over to the authorities, though Shira reminds her that a bracer's only priority is to protect the citizenry, meaning she should only relinquish the photo if she believes Joshua will become a threat to other people. And so, Estelle is forced to confront her current feelings about Joshua's absence, and settles on the stance that she does still trust him. The next morning brings no change to the victim's condition, and the fog has only become thicker. Since it's spreading farther into Roland's outskirts, we split up to check on these people, with the girls taking Pertzel Farm. Long story short, the entire Pertzel family also succumbs to unconsciousness. All the while, Estelle becomes increasingly frustrated with her inability to protect the people of her own hometown. In response, Shira has to actually slap some sense into her younger colleague. Estelle's clearly not the only one who's ever felt this way, but despite their own shortcomings and mistakes, Shira, as well as Agate, Zin, and even Estelle's own father, have kept putting one foot forward. Shira's words manages to lift Estelle's spirits, but now the group is stuck trying to decide who should stay to watch over the family. Though by the sheer grace of ATLUS, Kevin shows up right then and there and promises to use whatever medical knowledge he can to help the Pertzel family. The priest taking over here allows us to head back to the guild. A fellow bracer returns from his escort mission with a tip about some chiming bell sounds he heard coming from Wiswald Forest, so you can bet we head over immediately, where we soon find ourselves enveloped in a thick fog. It has us going around in circles, unable to escape for ages, though following the bell allows us to eventually return to reality. We find a gospel on the great tree in the heart of the forest. Then it's that same damn bell chiming that transports Estelle to an illusion of her childhood years, back to when her mom was still alive. Here she experiences the sweet memories of her youth, from fishing with her dad, to doing family chores with her mom, to eating together at the table as a family. However, Estelle soon realizes that something seems to be missing. This prompts her to explore the whole house until she eventually makes it to the storage room just as it was before it became Joshua's bedroom. She finds a harmonica, goes out onto the second floor balcony, and plays his song right where he used to perform. This is when young Estelle finally realizes that everything here is an illusion. Then her mom appears, asking her if she's going to leave. Estelle's response highlights that there are still important people and things that she needs to return to, something her mother is ultimately very proud of her daughter for realizing. Finally back in the reality of the forest, an old friend of Shira and Estelle's makes her appearance at last. Luciola, who was once part of the same troop Shira was part of, has joined Ouroboros as their Enforcer 6. The Gospel apparently has the ability to read minds, and when combined with Luciola's illusion magic, is able to create dreams that feel just like reality to its victims. Now, before Luciola vanishes, Shira proudly lets her know that Roland is her new home, and that she's no longer a dancer of the Harvey Circus troupe, but a proud bracer who'll never let anyone bring harm to Roland. Lucy is happy to hear this from Shira. Then once the Enforcer has left, the fog clears and everyone who was asleep finally awakens again. Back at the guild, Estelle finally comes clean with what's been troubling her recently, sharing the photo with Joshua with everyone at last. She explains that she doesn't need to chase after him directly, since she has her own work to take care of. Even though the two of them are walking different paths right now, she has faith that they'll eventually reach the same destination. Meanwhile, in some unknown location, Wiseman and Louvet are preparing the final gospel experiment, which has apparently led them to a massive dragon somewhere. Chapter 5 begins with Estelle and company taking off for Bose. Shira explains that Luciola once hailed from a family that could conjure up illusions via bells and fans. But she left her family to become the star act of the Harvey circus troupe instead. It was she and Mr. Harvey, the leader of said troupe, who originally took Shira in from off the streets. But the whole troupe disbanded ever since Mr. Harvey's untimely death 8 years ago. It was then that Luciola left Shira, claiming there was something she needed to do. And so, like Zin with Walter, Shira also wants to find Lucy to hear her side of the story. Meanwhile, Professor Russell finds that, instead of simply shutting down orbments, the Gospels actually absorb their energy. But since it should be impossible for something so small to contain all that potential energy, the logical conclusion is that the Gospels are terminals which send this absorbed power elsewhere. With this knowledge, Cassius asks the professor to create a device that can contain the Gospel's effect. Now in Bose, Lugren mentions that there has been a huge increase of dangerous monsters in the area. Something that worries Agate, since these monsters' strange behavior reminds him of something that happened many years ago. And what do you know? A massive dragon just swoops out of nowhere, completely destroying the Bose market in the process. Lieutenant Lawrence finally introduces himself for real as well. His real name is Lenhart, Enforcer number 2 of Ouroboros. He tells the Bracers that only the army can deal with something of this magnitude. Then he and the dragon take off into the distance, Agate dashing off in the same direction all on his own. Lugren gets word that a squadron of the army has been dispatched to Bose. Then he gets another urgent call, this time from the Elder of Ravenue village. The dragon has just attacked their orchards, which are nothing but charred ruins when we finally arrive. Agate helped them put out the fires before taking off after the dragon, which flew north. In the old abandoned mine, Louvet puts the dragon to sleep with a gospel, just as Agate arrives and promptly attacks. Louvet easily deals with Agate though, then says that even though they seem similar, they differ in the reason why they wield their blades. He lectures the redhead, warning him that someone like himself will always remain incomplete, since the only reason he fights is to fill the emptiness inside him. This prevents him from being able to move forward or from following the same path as Louvet. This analysis enrages Agate, but try as he might, Louvet easily slices his heavy blade in two. Now, before Enforcer 2 can deal a finishing blow, Tita runs between the two, shielding the Bracer with her own body. The dragon breathes fire at the others, preventing them from running to Tita's aid. Meanwhile, Tita drops her weapon to the ground and declares she absolutely will not move. Her bravery impresses Louvet, who decides to spare their lives, taking off instead once a military combat vessel arrives under General Morgan's command. After the dragon escapes, the general tells us to leave the situation to them, the military, since there's nothing us Bracers could possibly do about it. But that's when an injured Agate approaches General Morgan, grabs him by the collar, and furiously yells right to his face how the army is always one step too late, especially when it comes to 10 years ago. Then he collapses from sheer exhaustion. Back at the village, General Morgan surprisingly thanks us Bracers for responding so quickly to all the crises happening at the Bose Market and Ravenue. You see, during the 100 Days War 10 years ago, General Morgan's decision to form a defensive line around the village actually made this innocent place the perfect target for Erebonian incendiary rounds. Many homes and villagers' lives were lost that day, including Misha Krosner, Agate's little sister. So now knowing the truth, Estelle asked General Morgan to work with us, the Bracers, in regards to the situation. For one, Bracers are easier to mobilize than the army due to their smaller numbers, so she can understand why Agate had so much faith in the potential of bracers when Cassius first gave him the chance, since her dad, too, also became a bracer after he lost a loved one. The general is clearly moved by Estelle's reasoning and says he'll deliberate over it and call the guild later that night with his answer. So before us bracers head back to Bose, we leave it to Tita to watch over Agate, since he'll likely be out for a couple days. And staying true to his word, General Morgan calls the guild later, requesting us bracers as observers for the military operation they've planned for the following morning. Meanwhile, Agate awakens from a dream about his sister. He tries to get out of bed, but Tita won't have any of that. She exclaims how worried she was for him when he tried to fight Louve all alone, and even starts to cry. So Agate apologizes to Tita for everything, then shows her the simple stone pendant his younger sister made for him prior to her death. You see, Misha died 10 years ago because she tried to run back and grab this very same pendant while the village was under attack. When they finally recovered her body from the wreckage, she was still clutching this in her hand. Agate then calls himself pathetic for being unable to part with this and move on with his life. But Tita yells at him for thinking so poorly of the person she sees as her older brother. She gives him a big hug and says that although she may not be Misha, she knows many things about him that make him a great person. Tita's words help Agate realize that he's been unfairly beating himself up over Misha's death for so long. He understands now that, no matter what, it's up to him to keep plowing on ahead. Now back with Estelle and the others, we're greeted at the landing port by the royal flagship. It was Queen Alicia's wish to have the Arce involved in this operation in order to quell the panicked citizens' fears. Niall and Dorothy were also invited so that they may share the story with the public. Aboard the ship, General Morgan gives us a rundown of the plan. The mission involves 12 military airships total, or 2/5 of the entire Liberalian fleet. They'll lead the dragon over to Valeria Lake, while the remaining ships stationed at Leiston Fortress have been loaded with tranquilizer rounds. Heavy live ammunition will be used only in the instance that the tranquilizers fail, since Queen Alicia would like to avoid slaying a national treasure if at all possible. And so, we get to see the full capabilities of the military in action. Though unfortunately, when the Arce tries to dock next to the unconscious creature, a slit in the dragon's head opens up and reveals a gospel inside. This awakens the dragon and causes it to take off, with the Arce hastily attempting to pursue. But even this state-of-the-art ship's engines are unable to keep up with the dragon's incredible speed, and we lose sight of it above the Nebel Valley. Because of the Arce's size, we can't land in these mountains, so the operation is called off and we all return to Bose. This lets Agate and Tita finally catch up with us, though. Turns out Agate knows a man who has lived in the valley for years and is therefore familiar with the terrain. Also, he just received a priority delivery from Professor Russell, which contains a device that's able to break a gospel's thick frame. And so, the military agrees to pass this mission on to us bracers for once. Agate's contact Welmer points us to some ancient caves that eventually lead us to the dragon's lair. He's currently asleep at the moment, so the group takes their chance, starting with Agate's attempt to break the gospel. So it actually takes a few tries to get it right, but eventually we're able to successfully shatter the gospel. Now that the dragon has regained its own consciousness, he introduces himself as Ragnard, and thanks us for freeing him from the society's control. He expresses remorse at bringing ruin to Bose, and creates a massive septium crystal that he gives to us to take to those who have suffered on his behalf. Ragnard also mentions to Estelle that Cassius is an old acquaintance of his. He then flies up to greet the Arce and announces an end to his reign of terror thanks to the bracers. He then takes off into the vast skies. A week later, General Morgan, Agate, and Tita are seen offering flowers to Misha's grave. The general admits that he's been thinking a lot about the criticisms Agate has of the military, and is beginning to realize now how important it is that the military and bracers work together to resolve these kinds of situations. Moments after, Louvet shows up to offer his own flowers to the grave. They all agree not to fight, since such a thing would only disturb this gravesite. But General Morgan asks why a man like himself, who is willing to pay respect to the deceased, would do such horrible things. Louvet responds that he simply acts in accordance with the missions given to him by the Society. Then, in a similar fashion to what he did last game, he completely blindsides Morgan when he says a man bound to silence regarding Hamel has no right to criticize him. Louvet then warns Agate that by the next time they meet, his blade must be fully prepared to carry the weight of his own ideals. Once the Enforcer has gone, Agate mentions that Ravenue Village used to have occasional contact with Hamel before the war, but has had none since then. So he asks General Morgan if he knows why, though Morgan is unable to speak a word about it because of international security concerns. Back at the guild, Olivier reveals that Hamel used to be a village on Erebonia's southernmost border with Liberal, but tragically, it was completely wiped out in a landslide many years ago, and has not been included on Erebonian maps since. Now it's quite curious how Olivier knows this, though ultimately, we have bigger things to focus on than this question. Lugrin shares that Kurt's group sent word a couple days prior about seemingly having found the Society's secret base. So as we wait to hear more from their group, we take this opportunity to rest while we can. It actually turns out that Mayor Maybell has reserved rooms for us at the Kingfisher Inn, so it's here that we're reunited with Kevin once again. Since Ouroboros has already completed an experiment in each major region of Liberal, there's no telling what might happen next. But despite this dire news, the group enjoys their time on the lake in various ways, with a fishing competition even going down among some of the group members while everyone else watches. Then in the late afternoon, Estelle returns to the small pier where she and Joshua talked the last time they stayed here. She plays the first verse of The Whereabouts of Light on his harmonica, and happens to receive a round of applause from Kevin. Unlike their first meeting, his joking nature actually cheers her up, though that's quickly snuffed out again when a small boat approaches with an unconscious Kurt on board. Now, when the experienced bracer finally awakens, he's beyond frustrated that his memories have been stolen yet again. Zin's technique won't work like last time, but Father Kevin's thaumaturgy, a secret art of the church, manages to do the trick. Kurt recalls a research facility located on the northwestern shore of Lake Valeria, which has been able to stay hidden via projecting a dummy image into the sky to ward off patrol ships. Meanwhile, any approach by land has been met with dense fog. Even so, Kurt's team was finally able to find and infiltrate this base a couple days ago. However, it's now up to us to find the others left behind. At the research facility, we encounter various Society-manufactured orbital machines and modern-day archaisms. We also thankfully find Grant, Karna, and ATLUS, who are all cleared of this strange mind possession thanks to Kevin's thaumaturgy. Then finally at the top floor, we shockingly encounter Joshua, or well, actually it turns out to be another one of those orbital puppets. We are then congratulated by the Professor, Ren, and Louvet, who then proceed to knock us out via sleeping gas. By the time the others wake up, Estelle is nowhere to be seen, so they rush out onto the rooftop just as Weisman and his cronies take off into the night sky. But yeah, that's it for part 1 of 2 now, instead of 3, of this redo project to my Sky SC summaries. So please like and subscribe if you like this. Also, come join our welcoming Discord community at discord.gg/LadyVirgilia. Be sure to also follow me on Twitter and on Twitch, and check out my stream highlights and Genshin lore channels if those interest you. Get 10% off Rogue Energy products with my code LadyV, and lastly, I want to thank all my wonderful patrons for their support, especially Jared Breland, Andreas Hansen, Captain Hobo, Big Klingy, Sam Bezjak, Francesco Santoyo Rego, Silverwind847, Sathya Selvaraja, M. Meownalin, Gigi Sora, Platinum Rose, Malcolm Lowry, Killer Ninja 151, Melanie Gutierrez, Unholy Biscuit, Leviathan 8685, Eden Corsef, and Scarmillion.